Okay, good evening. We're going to get started. Wonderful to see lots of you online, and welcome Miriam in person. Glad you're here to keep me company. So for the second part in our Songs of the Seder series, we are doing what I call the GOAT of Pesach songs, the greatest of all time, which is, of course, Chad Gadya. Now, it's a bit controversial. Hey, Josh, welcome. Our source sheet is the Haggadah. So you can take one of these, and if you want to take it home, you can, because these are just leftover from a few years back when they sent us a few hundred of these to give out for free. So, this last week we spoke, what? Okay, great. You get something for coming in person, okay? So last week, we covered Dayenu, and we didn't have too much luck in finding a diversity of tunes beyond sort of the mashup that the Maccabees made for Dayenu. But I am curious about Chad Gadya, if there are more than, I know, 2 tunes to Chad Gadya. Yeah, so, this the Seder, of course, is a time that galvanizes our senses across generations. And so for me, my mother taught us a tune that her grandfather taught her. I'm not sure if it's really a tune, but it's sort of a sing-song kind of thing that we do. We sort of argue every year, that's our minhag, about which tune to do. And this year, as my parents are going to be here, my mom will be at the Seder, she's probably going to win out, because the last 4 years we've hosted all my siblings except our parents, without our parents, and the siblings sort of, lean in one direction. So the tune that everyone knows is Chad Gadya, Chad Gadya. So the tune that we sort of mumble through is Chad 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 Gadya, Chad 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 Gadya. Now I'm forgetting how the how the remainder goes, but that's how Chad 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 Gadya, Chad 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 Gadya. It'll come to me what the rest is, hopefully by the end. But there is a tune, somewhat, I could call it, be generous to call it a tune, that does go through all these verses and a little bit of a kind of sing-song. Anyone aware of any other tunes? No? Okay. Janie, I think you're on mute.
Yep. The tune that I grew up singing has a slight difference from the one that David's family had.
Okay.
Basically the same. I've been sitting here trying to get it, but it's really, I guess, the second verse where you can see the difference. And I don't know, maybe when we go through it, if we do a little bit more, yeah, it'll come to me. It's a slight difference.
Okay, well, I'm also struggling to recover the tune that I haven't sung in years, but that was drilled into me as a kid. So I can commiserate with that. But if it comes to you, let us know. So we have sort of 2 versions, and then maybe one of the versions has a little bit of an alternate, which is appropriate as these tunes sort of evolve through families who might have greater, tonal capacity than others. These tunes get, they change a bit. So the major question that we will be addressing in the next 40 minutes is, why do we make Chad Gadya the finale of the Seder? Why is it at the climax of the Seders? Some people have scoffed at it, that it's really just something that grabs people's attention. It's a little bit of a nursery rhyme, a little bit gimmicky, and we're actually going to address that head on in my Shabbat Hagadol shir this Shabbat afternoon, as we talk about Nirtza as a whole. When there was a group in the 16th century, or really 17th century, that started mocking the songs of Nirtza, especially Chad Gadya, got its fair share of people making fun of it, making light of it. And Rav Chaim Yosef David Azulai wrote a scathing responsa, putting someone in cherem, excommunication, for mocking the tunes of Nirtza. I kid you not. And the good old days, yeah, when rabbis had real authority to influence social dynamics by declaring someone outside the community for mocking a tune. So we'll see that he writes about how each of the songs of Nirtza have deep mystical meaning and were written by great, people who encoded so much so much Torah and so much significance in the various layers of them. And so we're going to take that as our premise. We're not going to make light of it too much, other than to just ask, before we dive deeply into the themes and the messages, just to ask about some of the family customs. Janie shared a bit about sort of an alternate tune, but I'm curious just to do a little bit of a crowdsourcing here about how we make this finale of the Seder memorable. Who here uses animal noises? If you use those noises, we got some hands up here. I'm super curious, what noise do you use for the Malach HaMavet or for HaKadosh Baruch Hu? It's always an argument in my family, what's appropriate, right? What does God sound like? Is God scary? Like in the Ten Commandments with a very deep, voice, or is God, more cheerful? What sound, emerges from the Malach HaMavet? Things with a stick and the goat are pretty simple. But if we do this for the stick, right, then what does the Malach HaMavet do? He gets a boo.
David
Okay.
had
What did David do?
David had the absolute best one.
What did David do?
I can't, I'll try my best. It was a
It was a little of a shakedown. I could see David performing that quite dramatically, and doing something special with his lips there. So that's fantastic, Janie. Any others want to volunteer what they use for the for HaKadosh Baruch Hu or for Malach HaMavet? Always been curious to sort of cross-pollinate ideas. Naomi, I see you smiling. Can you share with us what you guys do? You got to come off mute.
We usually just sing it. We don't do too many animal noises. I have masks and puppets for the different animals.
Oh, okay.
We don't do so many noises.
So you sort of dress up as the different animals. So what costume does God get?
Puppets.
Puppets. Okay. So we actually a few years back we did something similar in that they have I think they call them like the Eser Makot masks, right? This was before we all identified masks was covering the nose and the mouth and the nose. These were eye masks, right? And they had all the different, the boils and the blood and, and so we sort of use those for the 9, or I guess it's technically 10 verses of Chad Gadya, for the different characters. But again, not all of it is animals, so it doesn't fully sort of match the makot, but it's a creative sort of repurposing of some of the props, from early on in the Seder that might be hanging around on the back of people's chairs or on the floor at that point. So I like that idea.
So what does your family do?
So we do a combination of animal noises, and for we do something funny for the water. We do this thing of like, I'm not sure if I'll be able to replicate it, but we do this like thing on our cheek. I don't know if you can hear that online, but it's like this funny noise that we make that sounds like a water dripping, So that's a signature Cheses move. And I think for God, I think I think we just do like a whoo, kind of like spooky, but that doesn't give such a good rep to God, you know.
Yay!
So the subliminal messaging there isn't too strong. So maybe we'll think about rebranding that this year. But anyways, at that point in the Seder, everyone has a full 4 cups of wine in their stomach. Everyone is running off fumes, you know, exhausted, and running on adrenaline. So there's no judgment. Anything is funny, anything flies. And that's part of the purpose of Chad Gadya, is to create a lasting moment at which memories are formed. And so you sort of end on this sort of quirky high of these sort of fantastical sort of figures that are competing with this sort of cycle of quarreling and consumption and even violence. So we sort of have fun with it every year. So I want to try to add a little bit of depth when we don't have 4 cups of wine in our system, for us to be able to appreciate about why this is here and what the messages are.
So I before
go
we
ahead.
go into that, I have, you know, by looking at the text, I could come up with the slight differences if you want me to go over it.
Yeah, go for one.
So for the second verse, David's tune, Viata shon raviacha lagadya, dizbana bapi trezus echad gadya. And my family's Viata shon radia viacha lagadya, dizbana bapi trezus echad gadya. So it's kind of putting a final thing before you go on, but it's
Right.
only like every other verse. Well, no, you do that every verse.
So it pauses before the refrain of
Yeah.
Zabin Abba Bidrezuze. So that makes sense. I think, you know, to distinguish between the verse and the refrain of, you know, Chad Gadya, you know, Zabin Abba Bidrezuze. So there's I think there's some method to that madness there. So thank you for sharing that little difference on that little.
So
Yeah,
some,
you have to do it.
Yeah, that it sort of acknowledges the separation between the two parts. Okay. Any other comments about traditions or customs on this one?
so sometimes what I do to engage older and the teenagers is I tape things to the bottom of the plate and they don't know it's there until they flip it. So it could be a question or a song or a tune, and then you have to participate because you have to like see what's under your plate. So I try to engage everybody a little bit that way.
That's super creative, and it makes certain that they finish their karpas, because if not, then it'll land up on their lap. So that's a cute idea. I like that, Beth. Thank you for sharing. Okay, so let's delve beneath the surface here to understand perhaps what some of the intention of the author was. The author of Chad Gadya is unknown, but I was just reading from Chaim Nussbaum, which is a Haggadah that I found on the shelf over here, about how it first appears about 500 years ago. It made its way into the Haggadot, and we're going to see on Shabbat that Nirtza really came to fruition as an entity about 600-700 years ago. It's not something that is part of the Haggadah before the late medieval times. Definitely the Gaonim and the template of the Haggadah that we have from the Mishnah and the Gaonim don't have Nirtza or any of these piyutim, but it makes sense that these piyutim would be introduced during a time of where piyutim flourished. all of the tunes that we've studied over the last 6 months on Shabbat piyutim, all were written in the late medieval ages, where there was a flourishing of this, and this was part of the influence of the golden age of Spain and some of the culture of poetry making its way into sort of liturgical places. So it makes sense that Nirtza sort of got its wind at that time, and Chad Gadya was a later kind of addition to that. So there are, Rabbi Kenneth Brander wrote an essay in which he surveys 3 different thematic approaches to Chad Gadya. And maybe we'll just read through the last verse just to make it fresh in terms of what the order is for the sort of cycle. That it's not really a cycle, but the progression of characters. So I'll just go down to the 9th. V'ata kadosh baruch hu v'shachat l'malach hamavet v'shachat l'shochet v'shachat l'torah v'shata l'maya v'chaba l'nira v'saraf l'chodra v'hika l'chabad v'nashach l'shmra v'yachal l'gadya v'zabamidu v'chal. We also have a thing in my house that we go very fast at this point. So even when I'm reading it, that speed sort of comes out naturally. So just to translate that, so we get a slower sense of what the sequence is here. So the last step is when Hashem comes and he slaughters the angel of death, who slaughters the slaughterer, and the slaughterer had slaughtered the ox, who drank the water that extinguished the fire, that burnt the stick, that hit the dog, that ate or bit the cat, that ate the kid that my father bought with 2 zoos, one kid. There's a whole series of questions we could ask about what's going on here, right? I've never seen a cat that could eat a goat. Maybe a bobcat, but there aren't too many of those hanging around. And also, okay, a dog might be able to bite a cat, but as achla l'gadya always bothered me what that meant. Is that literal? So all of these explanations that we're gonna explore are non-literal explanations of this story. So the first approach is from Rav Yaakov Emden, and he sees this entire sequence, this entire song about as being a personal odyssey of self-development and self-refinement, or growth, we could say. So let's go through it step by step and to see how he reads this into, or how he sees this emerging from the steps of this song. So the first thing he says is he quotes that a goat is known to symbolize a neshama. That is foreign to me, but that's his premise, that the kid or the goat, the gadya, is the soul that is small, that our Father gave us at our first breath. The moment that we come into the world and we are created, that's the one little goat that my Father bought, is God bestowing us with our souls. And this was bought for 2 zuzim. Zuz here does not mean money or coins, which is the literal, but it comes from this is in Aramaic, but it overlaps with the Hebrew lazuz, which means what? To move. So the soul is always moving. It's always breathing. It's always animating. It's the life force of our body. And the third part is, then came the cat and ate the goat. So the cat represents the body that eats up the soul by becoming involved in undisciplined physical pleasure. So this is what happens to the soul of a child who runs for instant gratification, candy, sweets, thrill. And so that's the cat consuming the soul, the goat. And then in the fourth step, the dog came and bit the cat. So with age, new desires of the body arise that are never satiated. The dog, again, represents these desires like jealousy and lust and honor. We think of a dog as being very instinctual and not having the restraint. So again, that's the body wrestling with the soul. And then came the stick that beat the dog. So the stick is our ability to have discretion and to be able to refine and to curb our desires and our behaviors. So I think that makes sense. The stick sort of symbolizes the corrective rod. And then the fire comes and in a moment of passion burns the stick, right? Anger and lust can easily undermine all the training and discipline that has been hard earned. And then the water can come and put out the fire. What is water? So water is compared to what? To Torah, right? And so the Torah is what is the medicine that heals the destruction of the Yetzer Hara. That's Gemara, which says Barati Yetzer Hara, Barati Torah Tavlin. That the Tavlin is the medicine that is there to heal from the destructive forces of passion and desire, of the fire that had burnt the stick. So with enough Torah, we can put out the fire and allow the stick to actually refine our body and allow the soul to be the controlling force in us. And then what happens? On occasion, an ox comes and drinks up the water. There are moments where something big and bulky just bulldozes the Torah aside and takes away all of its influence, all of its vitality, all of its sweetness. And then eventually the bull meets its destiny in the knife of the slaughterer. Even the momentary sort of bulldozing of the ox is only temporary, and eventually the Torah has the ability to overtake it. And then the angel of death comes to remove the soul from the body. This is the ultimate fate of every human being. This is the moment of death after going through all of the seasons and the stages of life. And then Hashem takes over and welcomes the soul back to its place of origin together with its maker for the rest of eternity. Okay, so that's how Rabbi Yaakov Emden understands the depth of Chad Gadya, that it's the cycle of self-perfection that happens over the course of a human lifespan.
Cycle of self what?
Of self-perfection.
Self-perfection.
Okay, definitely not something that I was thinking about every time that I make a
Noise.
noise on my cheek or kind of goat sound. So definitely adding some depth to my understanding. So Miriam, what are the challenges of this one?
Well, we said the water was Torah. That we said the slaughter is the Torah. That kind of will be the good place.
Yeah. Each one of these is not fully coherent because it's reading, sort of symbolism into each of these things. So, so the slaughterer is again sort of the force of Torah that is able to even overcome the ox that drank it up. Right. So again, we can appreciate this now, but I would say that at 1 o'clock in the morning, we're not going to be running logic tests through these explanations, and maybe they'll just provide us a little bit of a boost, something to share. So let's go through the next two approaches, which will be a little bit more quick, but we'll still go through each of the sort of 11 verbs or 11 sort of actions that happen in this. So the second approach is that of Rabbi Yonatan Eibschitz, who was really the arch nemesis of Rabbi Yaakov Emden. Rav Yaakov Emden was known to have accused Rav Yonatan Eibschitz of being a Sabbathian, and that caused a lot of drama and tension. Rabbi Jacob J. Schachter wrote his dissertation at Harvard while he was the rabbi here at the shul on that exact topic. So he's shared a lot about that over the years, but that's not for now. So the approach of Rav Eibschitz is that Chad Gadya is about the historical saga of the Jewish people. So what does that mean? So the goat represents the Jewish people that their father, Hashem, contracted with and formed a special relationship with through Sinai and through Yetziat Mitzrayim. The two zizim are the bond that cemented this contract through the contracts of the Brit Ben Habatarim with Abraham and the Brit that was formed again with Abraham at Akedat Yitzchak, that his sons will be the ones that carry on his legacy. So that represents the beginning of the Jewish people's relationship with Hashem and their special status that were cemented in two ways. Then the cat came, and the cat represents Paro and how he enslaved Hashem's special children by trying to consume them and throw them into the Nile River. And then the dog came and ate the goat. This is Amalek, that it's really the dog that came and bit the cat, which this is something that's missing here because he writes about the dog coming and eating the goat. So maybe he had a different girsa, which changes everything, because I guess technically the goat is inside the cat. So I guess, the dog could have eaten the goat, but but he says that this is Amalek that came from behind in the same way that a rabid dog would come from behind to bite. So the Jewish people, the goat who were leaving Egypt, were attacked from behind by Amalek. And then the stick came to beat the dog. This is the staff of Moshe that led the Jewish people past Paro and past Amalek to clear the cat and the dog. And then the fire burned the stick. This is the fire of the Mizbeach and the Mishkan that came to replace the staff of Moshe and generated a new portal of connection. Right, burned here is not a bad thing. Oftentimes we think of that as being a negative kind of consuming, destructive fire, but here it's a fire of the Mizbeach, which is a portal of connection to and also protection by Hashem in the Midbar, where the fire protects us from the natural forces. And then the water puts out the fire. Again, not a bad thing. But after the portals of fire were destroyed, Ezra uses the Torah as water to rehabilitate the people. Again, we're moving, through Jewish history here in sort of leaps and bounds. And then the ox came, and the ox represents the Greek, who during the second Beit HaMikdash forced the Jews to disavow their relationship with Hashem. But then the ox was slaughtered by the Hashmonaim, who reinstated Jewish power and Jewish pride. And then came the angel of death, which was the Roman Emperor Titus, who took the lives of thousands of Jews and razed Har HaBayit and sent the Jewish people into exile. And then finally came Hashem, who will rebuild the third Beit HaMikdash and will guarantee religious freedom, stability, and safety in Eretz Yisrael. So we have the last verse being futuristic, even though the tense, is that the Ata HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Shachat, is in the past that he did so. It's sort of repositioned and focused forward to be referring to the future and final Geula. Okay, so the first two explanations have a lot to do with the verbs that are in play in the song, whether it's eating or beating or burning or drinking or slaughtering. All of those have significance. The third approach, that of the Khatam Sofer, makes more significance out of the different entities that appear on the stage without giving so much meaning to their actions, to the verbs. So the Khatam Sofer says that this song is all about a review of the Korban Pesach and the Korban which was brought on Pesach. So let's go through this briefly. So the one little goat, of course, represents the goat that was brought as part of the Korban Pesach. And there was a second goat that was brought on Pesach itself, which was the Korban Chagiga. So that's what the goat represents. And 2 zuzim, the Gemara in Chagiga says that the standard going rate for a goat was 2 zuzim of silver. Okay, so when you went to the Beit HaMikdash for pilgrimage during the Shalosh Regalim and you brought a Korban Chagiga or you bought the Korban Pesach, you would spend 2 zuzim of silver in order to purchase the goat. And then came the cat. This is a little bit out there, but the Gemara says that the meow of a cat is a symbol of singing, right? The cats that I hear meow in Israel are definitely not melodic. I feel like somebody is dying every time I hear one of them jump out of a dumpster and go meow. Those of you who are smiling know exactly what I'm talking about. But nevertheless, that potentially pleasant sounding meow represents singing, which points us to the Hallel that the Chabura, the group of people that were sitting and eating the Korban Pesach together, engaged in. That they were required to sing to Hashem, and so the cat showing up on the scene represents the singing. Right? Again, this ignores the violence of the cat eating the goat, but just the cat showing up represents the scene of people singing around their sort of roasted shawarma. And then came the dog. The dog symbolizes the end time for eating the Korban Pesach. How does it do that? Because the Gemara has a story in which dogs bark at midnight. And somehow they know the exact middle point between sunset and sunrise. And this was like the alarm clock that when the dogs started barking, you knew you had to put your fork aside and stop eating your lamb chops. And then came the stick. And what is the stick? So most of the this explanation, he's just citing Gemara's Divrei Chazal about the different symbols in this song. So Chazal used the stick as an image for the way that the smoke would travel from the Mizbeach if the Korbanot merutzeh, if they were accepted, if they were favorable, if they were found to be pleasing, like nirtza. And so the Gemara says that if the smoke was blowing in one direction or another, it showed that the korbanot were not being received well. But if the korban was, if the pillar of smoke was going straight up like a stick, then it showed that it was pleasing. So this is the part when we assume that the korbanot, the korban Pesach, was being well received by Shamayim. And then came a fire, which again doesn't say anything about burning the stick, but the fire represents this again. Chazal have this notion of a mikdash shel mala and mikdash shel mata, that there are two parallel sort of sanctuaries, one in our world and one in the heavens, and the fire is representing how the smoke of the Mizbeach was the connection between the fire of the Mikdash Shel Mata and the Mikdash Shel Mala. And so the next stage in determining the reception of our korbanot was to say that the smoke went straight up to the fire in heaven. Again, that is sort of a ma'amar chazal that is being fit into. And then the water comes, and what role does the water play? The water was used for the morning after the Korban Pesach when they had to clean everything up. So the Gemara talks about how in the Beit Hamikdash. Yeah, this is all about the scene of the Korban Pesach and the Beit Hamikdash. The Gemara, the Mishnah and Pesachim talk about this. I was just finishing this with my daughter. We just finished Masachet Pesachim. We're almost done making a siyum on Moed for her bat mitzvah. We just have one Masachet left. And so the Mishnayot talk about how the blood would be up to the knees of the Kohanim. Because if you think about hundreds of thousands of korbans being brought in a period of hours, the stuff was just, yes, the stuff just accumulated, right? And so the morning after, they had to flush out the system, right? So they had to use all of the water in the kior. They had to really clean up, right? So that's what the water, and then the ox is part of the korban musaf that was given on Pesach day, right? Following the night, there was a par that was brought, as we read about in Musaf. And how was that par prepared? The slaughterer, i.e. the Kohen, came to slaughter the ox. And then came the angel of death, which was the nation of Rome, right? Who killed the Kohanim and took away the sacrificial right from them. So in this, the last two explanations, both from Rav Emden and from the Chatam Sofer, they agree that the angel of death is Rome. Okay, so there's some consistency there. So the angel of death is the one that took away the Kohanim. And then he also says that the presence of Hashem at the very end is the one that will smite the angel of death. That we have faith that the efforts of Rome will be fully reversed when we are able to worship, sing, and sacrifice the Korban Pesach and the Korban Chagiga and the Par Shel Musaf again in the Beit HaMikdash. So I think this last approach of the Chatam Sofer is reasonable in the sense that it's consistent in its hermeneutic of using Divrei Chazal to interpret all of these different sort of characters that show up. Okay, so what do we make of these? What do we think? Do these are definitely not intuitive, right? This takes a lot of work, right? But sometimes interpreting poetry has a lot to do with sort of the lens that you hold up to it, right? The certain sort of angle that you assume when you're reading it. So I think each of these sort of has its own internal arc to it, right? Which the arc itself makes sense. All of the connected points, along that arc, some of them are a little bit stronger than others. But I think that it's significant that this sort of fits into the climax of the Seder, especially in the last two versions, that of the Chatam Sofer and Rabbi Yonatan Eibshitz, where they see the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu eliminating death as pointing to the Geula Ha'atid, the future redemption. And so we're really, a lot of Nirtza is about not looking backwards, but looking forwards, right? I should put it differently, looking backwards in order to look forwards, meaning that all of this hype about Yetziat Mitzrayim is good and great, but ultimately what we want and what we're ending with is another Yetziat Mitzrayim, where we can actually have our own, Geula Shlema. And towards that end, I noticed that there are some additional verses that have been written to Chad Gadya in contemporary Israeli Haggadot. which add on another sort of chapter to this sort of cycle or sequence, I should say, about being in Israel, but not just being in the land, but having the Beit HaMikdash and having full sovereignty and security be restored to the region. And so that's sort of the next, if we want to carry through with the trajectory of Chad Gadya, right, there perhaps, which was written certainly from a galut kind of mentality, perhaps it would be appropriate to add an additional verse to say, like, this is how the saga continues and what the needs still are in order for us to get where we need to go in our current times. So it's interesting that in those Haggadot, they translate this from the Aramaic to Hebrew, which is a very political thing because the main language of the Jewish people in Galut was Aramaic. Right, and the fact this was written in Aramaic makes it seem that it was very old, but perhaps it was written in Aramaic just 500 years ago to try to reclaim sort of the first language that was spoken after the Second Temple in Galut, which was primarily Aramaic. That's the language of the Talmud Bavli. So there is a mystical reason why something would be written in Aramaic, because Chazal say that the angels don't understand Aramaic. And so this would be a direct way to connect to God without going through any intermediaries, right? That's sort of why Kaddish is said in Aramaic. That's one of the reasons why it was preserved in that way, and why some of the other tefillot, like Brich Shmei, are also in Aramaic. But why this was preserved in Aramaic was sort of in order to maintain the galut mentality. And so in a sort of subversive way, some of the contemporary Israeli Haggadot translate the whole thing into Hebrew, into modern Hebrew, and add that final verse to sort of update it. So that's just a fascinating piece of sort of the Chad Gadya history in contemporary times. But I hope this gave us a different and new way to appreciate this fantastic tune at the end of our Seders. And hopefully, you can bring it up usually during Chad Gadya or right before Chad Gadya is not the time, but yeah, but at a lunch or, or a coffee kind of talk, you can bring up some of this and it makes for great conversation. So thank you to everyone for joining and for some of your insights. I'll say Laila Tov to all those who are online.
Thank you, Rabbi Cheses. Happy Pesach. Thank you.
You as well.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Chag Sameach.
Laila Tov, Chag Sameach.
Thank you.